Coming up, De'Aaron Fox and the Kings may not come to that contract extension, leading to speculation he could be on the trade market with connections to the Brooklyn Nets. We give you 3 big reasons why it's not going to happen. Coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is sponsored by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, how about it? A little bit of the Kings. We talked about them maybe being trade partners for Cam Johnson. And now all of a sudden, with 1 year remaining on his contract and extensions potentially stalling those conversations between Fox and the Kings, maybe he's on the trade market as we head towards the deadline. Initial reaction to the Shams Charania report.
Yeah, surprised, not surprised. I like, the NBA is just, every 2 seconds is a guy who doesn't want to play in the team that they're on. So from that standpoint, not all that surprising. I mean, a little bit surprising because they just went through the act of firing the coach who it seemed like maybe wasn't getting along with Fox, and that maybe was a preemptive move to try to keep him. I mean, that's maybe conjecture. So I'm a little surprised from that standpoint. The team isn't very good. He's in a contract here. He's under contract for 1 more year, so he clearly wants to probably find his next landing spot and then sign an extension with whatever that next spot is, and he clearly doesn't want that to be Sacramento. So I'm not that surprised just because it always happens, and maybe he sees Sacramento as sort of just treading water, and this had kind of been out there a little bit that he wasn't happy with it. Yeah. So not really. I think there are implications for where the Nets are concerned, which we'll talk about, but overall, not really surprised. And I also don't think this is one of those massive NBA ground shaking players, though there are some teams he would get it on and he would definitely make them better. So, including one of the teams where he's reported to maybe want to go to. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm landing right now. But I think there are Nets implications for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because, we've heard about Miami and what are they going to do with Jimmy Butler and teams that might be interested because they need to swing big here. We've heard about Phoenix and Bradley Beal and what might happen there. So when you hear about De'Aaron Fox, just from an NBA level, your ears do perk up because he's 27 years old, right? So he's not 31. He's not 34 in the case of Jimmy Butler. So there's a reason why certain teams would start to look at this. And we'll talk about price point and, as you mentioned, the way it relates directly back to the Brooklyn Nets potentially. What I will say is just on a high level, De'Aaron Fox, I mentioned, 27 years old. He just turned 27 in late December. So he'll be coming in at 28 in the last year of his contract, and then we assume an extension. On a high level from a stat standpoint, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he obviously wouldn't be, a great addition to any team, be a good addition to the Nets, depending on what circumstances they're in. However, for a team like the Kings to feel like they don't need to push all in with him, potentially, in this situation, it does indicate a little bit to me about whether or not I think De'Aaron Fox might be a little bit of empty calories. When you look at his stats and you see he's a 25-point scorer, he's 47% from the field this year, notably that he's having one of his worst years in a couple from beyond the arc, and is only a 33% shooter from deep as it stands right now. That's why, I said at the top there, and we can get this out of the way or continue to flesh it out. I don't see this being someone the Brooklyn Nets should be interested in pivoting here as the deadline approaches to get ahead of the contract negotiations. This is not the name. Even if it was a precursor to a larger move, I still would have real reservations about getting into the De'Aaron Fox waters right now when he's on the verge of wanting a massive payday coming up here in the season.
Yeah, there's just nothing about the timeline that makes sense for where the Nets are, right? I just don't. They'll always, they're going to be in and around these rumors from now till kind of whenever, just because they're going to have a lot of cap room. Yeah. We know Sean Marks has liked to swing big in the past. He fancies the guys that are the best players, as every GM should. But I just don't think this particular situation, this is just not the guy. This is not the guy that you would reformulate sort of the rest of your trajectory around, right?
Of course.
You do that when it's Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving coming in the door. You do that when Giannis comes available. Those are the players that you think about sort of like changing course to whatever you were or pushing your chips in. De'Aaron Fox is a nice player, but he's just not that guy. Like, especially you don't know where you're going to pick in the draft. You're never trading this pick, right?
No.
Like, you're not knowing what this pick is. You're never trading this one. So like, that's off the table. You're not trading next year's either. You'd be insane to trade like that, one of those picks for De'Aaron Fox. So I just don't think he's the guy. It's like the same thing with Jimmy Butler. It's like, what would be the point? What's the point?
Yeah.
Like, you sign him to a long-term deal. You hope he's happy. You don't even know who the players in the team are going to be. You try to shake loose some other star. You pay to get him. So therefore you don't have any capital. You lessen your capital to go get the next guy. All of it just doesn't really line up for me. And does that make sense? Like, I just don't.
Yeah.
I think there's other implications, but like, this is just not the guy. Very good player, just not the guy that you kind of change you turn the tugboat around, like, to go pick someone else up. Like, that's just not really what happens here.
And listen, I mean, so just quickly from a Kings perspective, because yes, I do agree with you, right? And I think some fans would say, well, you get him because then you're ready to go land that other guy, that real superstar, and you have De'Aaron Fox in place. But you have Sabonis making over 40 million. Fox is making over 34. You have over 23 in DeRozan, over 17 in Monk, like 16 in Hurd. Like, they got a lot of money front loaded on their books, and they are a team that's hard capped at the first apron. So there's reasons why the Kings are sitting here saying, well, we maybe need to make a decision around this. But the simple fact that the rumors are bubbling up that De'Aaron Fox is not going to stay with the Kings and the next contract isn't going to be there, that in some way should tell you a big part of the story about whether or not he's worth signing to a long extension. They don't want to sign him to the long extension. Now, there can be because he doesn't want to stay there and all that other stuff that goes on. We understand that. But the idea that this player is available at this age, entering basically what will be the prime of his career, that should tell you a lot about whether or not he's the kind of guy you go all in on. And then you have what's the price point, how many draft picks, as you mentioned. There's no way you're touching any of the Nets' chop capital here over the next 2 years. The interesting thing that I think some people have floated around is the injuries that he's had this season, whether or not the Nets could make a move like this for this player and then just kind of sit him for this season and then go into the offseason and still maintain it. That to me is just so fraught with so many pitfalls to it that it wouldn't make sense. But coming up here in a second, let's get into where his contract stands, how massive the extension would probably be. And even though the Nets could go after a player like this, there's clear reasons, again, as we say, why it should not be the guy you go all in for. We'll do that here coming up in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at Gametime. Look, when you're attending those live events, unforgettable experience, just bringing all the fans together, whether it's a playoff game or we're just through the playoffs in the NFL, whether it's just regular season, going to one of these Nets games, Knicks games across town, or if it's just going to the concert, the theater, the comedy show, whatever it is, you want to make sure you're getting the best deal on those tickets. You want to maybe just find out the stuff that's happening in your area, get the picks made easy for you. That's where Gametime Picks comes in to make getting tickets for events even easier. Filters out the fluff, so it can only show you the incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So much going on here. I mean, tons of hockey stuff over on Gametime. No doubt about it. They got Hurricanes at Rangers, Avalanche at Islanders, Flyers at Devils, all starting at like amazing prices. So you're starting at $11, starting at $13. Let's just check in real quick on where they are with the Nets. So we're going over the Nets over in Gametime. I'm doing this live, folks. Rockets at Nets on Tuesday, starting at $12. Oh my God. Wait for the next one, though. Wait for the next one. Wizards at Nets.
Yeah.
You want to take a guess where these are starting, and then we're going to get out of this one?
$1.50.
$4 over at Gametime.
Oh
you can go see the Nets at the Wizards starting at $4 on Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode talking about De'Aaron Fox, the speculation that he could very much be on the move here. Another big reason as we talk about why the Nets are not going to pursue him. And by the way, they are one of the teams that is mentioned as being interested in the potential of landing a player like this. I knocked some papers off the desk here, guys. I got to be honest with you, a little disheveled. I get excited around the deadline, as Doug will tell you. And as you mentioned, the Nets are always going to be attached to any name of significance because of all the assets they have and all the cap room they're going to have. But the other reason not to get into these waters is because De'Aaron Fox is still a good player. Like, I'll use the Ringer as just a barometer for sake of what I pulled up in the background here. When they came into this season listing the top 100 players, they put Fox at 19. They put Sabonis, by the way, at 20. So, I mean, we can get into the weeds on whether or not this chart makes a lot of sense or how much it would have changed over the course of this year. But point being, some other contending team that thinks that Fox is going to mean something to their efforts to have a deep playoff run, they're going to try to push some of their chips into the table here for this player right now. And that should be reason for Sean Marks to go, even if I was interested, we're not talking multiple first and getting into play, right? Like there has to be a restriction for yourself around what assets you're going to fire off in a potential deal like this relative to who you think could be on the horizon over the next 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, and like it's funny too because even with a guy like Fox, and wherever these rankings are going to go, and like there's always just a okay, it's like okay, well he's high at 219, or high at 19. Okay, fine. I mean, how low he's not at 50. You know what I mean? So like so
we can
like,
all agree.
It's a spectrum, right? Yeah. Also, like when a guy's at let's say 19 in that range, and the 20 best players. If that's your best player, you can know where you're going to kind of get capped out, right? If he's your second best player, because you have a guy in the top 10, you can kind of start figuring out where the ceiling is. Like that's kind of how these things end up going. I mean, there is word that he wants to, maybe his preferred landing spot is San Antonio, which I think is really interesting. Yeah. Like that he wants to just pair up with Wemby, which is good for him, like a small, not really defensive first guard, but also has like the scoring pop that Spurs need. If that is actually true, that's a really interesting sort of like career forward thinking piece, which I actually do respect. Like if you're going to ring chase, well, not even ring chase, because that's like the wrong word. If you're going to go for it, that's like a pairing that could really make sense. You're like, I might want to attach my, get tied to the hip with this guy for the next 5 years. Like that's a really smart, I think that's a really smart business decision. Anyway, so those are the kind of things, like those are the kind of landing spots where you start to think, oh yeah, that really makes sense. Or if like, this isn't going to happen, but if the Nuggets had said like, oh, we're going to move on from Jamal Murray and like, like something that's like pair with Jokic. Oh yeah. That like those are the things that make sense for a player like him. So if he's actually thinking that way, I mean, clearly the Nets are all the way out of this anyway, but I like that from a just overall NBA standpoint, because I think that is, like I said, a good business decision. If you're going to move out of Sacramento, don't necessarily pair up with just like anybody or go anywhere. Like, hey, just go play with Wemby here for 5 years. And see if you can get a ring, because I actually think that's reasonable.
And don't, even if, listen, you can go ring chase with certain opportunities. Some people have said, well, the Suns who are talking about trying to jettison Bradley Beal and they want to get Jimmy Butler, maybe if they could figure out a way to bring a deal together to go get Fox. Okay. And guess what? Depending on what that timeline looks like, that can work out for you. And Suns might be a bad example because who wouldn't want to play with Durant? But just the idea of, as you say, hitch your wagon to a guy that's like ascending right now and is going to continue to ascend over the next handful of seasons, where you think you can be a part of something that builds and sustains, as opposed to, everyone's already thrown at the Lakers and said, there's no way that they can make this happen. So they're not in the mix. And we know that. But even if they could, do I want to go hitch my wagon to LeBron James in the Western Conference for one little trip here, only to have him? I mean, he's got to retire at some point, right? And then you turn yourself around, you go, so now I'm just De'Aaron Fox on the Lakers with Anthony Davis, and you probably need another guy. It's interesting, but I think I do like the idea of the Spurs there for sure. One other part of this too, I will say, is we're fleshing through some of the different reasons why the Nets obviously are not going to be in on this. I will just sidebar, because I want to talk about how this ties to Cam Johnson and the trade market. That's probably a big piece from how it impacts the Nets. Is I did reach out in real time to Matt George, Locked On Kings. I said, is the Fox trade buzz real and legitimate? He said, very. And I said, we're recording a podcast right now about how the Nets are completely out on De'Aaron Fox. But there you go. So just from Matt George, that this is 100% something that it looks like the Kings are going to do. And I will say there is misery and company here around organizations that seem to have a hard time getting it right. And I've had conversations with Matt where it's constantly, right? You think maybe, and then they go and they swing for DeMar DeRozan. Okay, well, once you make the Fox trade, by the way, the next fallout is everybody else on this roster. Because guess what? The Kings are going to be going in a different direction here in a hurry if they move on from the centerpiece of their team right now. Let's get into the Cam Johnson of it all and how this impacts teams that were interested in him, what they're willing to pay for him, and now there being another premier talent on the market.
I mean, it kind of might screw up the market for Cam Johnson, to be honest with you. Yeah. Like if there's every time a De'Aaron Fox hits the market or a Jimmy Butler hits the market and these guys are going to get traded, you're just not the best trade asset anymore. Now, maybe asset's the wrong word, because the contracts are different. The price tags were always going to be different for these guys. Maybe even the teams that would be looking for these guys kind of change. But the simple fact of it is, like the more these guys hit the market, like some of the teams that might have been in contention to think about trading for him, like the Kings, who have been rumored to be interested here for a while, they're not going to trade for Cam Johnson if Taryn Fox is going out the window. Like they're not going to bolster a short-term piece to kind of get some 3-point shooting around. I mean, I don't think so. Right. And so I just think it does nothing but hurt the value a little bit. Right. Like,
yeah.
And whatever you want to say, maybe it was just never on the table. Maybe the Kings always kind of knew that this was a possibility. And any of those rumors were maybe just trial balloons to show Fox that they were interested in getting better. I mean, this happens too, right? It's like, oh, we'll have it out there that we're in the mix to get Cam Johnson because that will keep you happy because you know the team's going to be a little better and we're going to make a playoff run. And that doesn't really work. And they were only as interested as long as Fox might have been on the team. Right now, I'm making that up, but I'm just saying like that's the kind of thing that can happen. It's like we'll signal it. Let's see how he takes it. Still wants out.
Does that excite you? Oh, you're excited about Cam Johnson on the Kings. Interesting. All right, maybe we'll explore a little further.
Like, I don't know. Again, I'm making that up, but that kind of like circle gets the square on that for me. Like I can kind of see it sort of happening, and so I would say that removes one team from the mix. I still think there's plenty of teams that would want him, so I don't think it's like it doesn't crater the value. Some of these other teams that have wanted him aren't really in the De'Aaron Fox or Jimmy Butler markets either.
Yeah.
A la Memphis, OKC, teams like that. So I still think there is a market, but it does suck a little bit that like one team gets out of the mix here. And I don't know, not the end of the world. I still think there's going to be movement. Clearly, we're going to have another like sort of ground shift around some of these teams because Butler's like already getting, I mean, he doesn't want to, he got removed from the team basically. They're going to trade him almost for sure. Looks like Fox is gone too. Not 100%. Like they could stick through it here, but I just don't know. I can't see how that helps the Cam Johnson market. I guess that's my only thing. I don't think it craters it, but I don't think it helps it.
And I do wonder what happens because we've even heard this about Cam Johnson as well. And we've heard the Sean Marks posturing and teams posturing back and forth ahead of the deadline about what they're willing to give up. What will be interesting is what is the market for Fox and what are teams willing to give up, right? So the way that this may be, and we'll get into this a little bit further here in a second, the way that maybe this benefits Brooklyn, because I think there is a push and pull here. It's what does Fox cost us and what does Cam Johnson cost us? And oh, by the way, Jimmy Butler included in this, other players being talked about are players that want big contracts, whether it's in the immediacy or over the next potentially season when it comes to Fox, right? So you have big price tags that are potentially out there for you, whereas Cam Johnson, even if on the higher side than what you might want to pay him, is at least controlled over the next few years as well. So we'll continue this on the other side as we talk about the potential of Fox being on the move and how the Nets could just maybe benefit in the end. We'll do that here to close things out in just one moment. All right, folks, it's Locked On Nets. He's Doug. I'm Adam. You get it. And we're talking about Fox. We're talking about the possibilities of De'Aaron Fox leaving from the Kings. Other ways that the Nets can benefit in this, but as a note here, it is crazy that the Kings are 7-3 in their last 10 games. They're 24-22. They're behind. They're 10th right now in the West, but they're behind a Mavericks team that has their own injury problems. The Suns are trying to figure out what they're going to do. The Timberwolves are in this weird kind of like, it is interesting to me that the Kings are potentially going to throw in the towel on being competitive and trying to be in the playoffs. And I think as you and I talked about a lot when the Nets were preparing for this tank, it can get a lot worse. Like being the 10th seed and trying to fight your way into the playoffs may feel like there's not a lot of hope there. There's way less hope when you are a team like the Brooklyn Nets and you're just losing games and you're not sure 100% that you're going to spike that lottery ball when it comes to getting that premier talent next year.
I mean, you're saying it can get worse, like when you're saying it can get worse.
You feel like, hey, listen, this thing is bottomed out. Fox doesn't want to stay here necessarily. Let's move him now. Like, let's whatever. You go, okay, great. But you're already like same kind of thing we talk about with the Nets. It's, hey, you're already, look at your season, right? Like you're already sitting here. You've won more than enough games. Now they don't have their own first round pick this upcoming draft. So there's a difference there. You don't have to worry about tanking yourself down, but yeah, like this is going to get ugly. And if you're the Kings and you're on the West Coast and you've got the Lakers and you've got the Clippers, and you got the Warriors, there are a lot of teams competing in that market for the premier talent of the NBA. And the Kings historically have often found themselves on the outside looking in. So this can get real bad for the Kings in a really brutal way for them over the next couple seasons.
Yeah, for sure. And like it's really hard to be in that middle ground, right? Like I think sometimes you're the victim of sort of outperforming, like overperforming a year early, like which the Kings kind of did 2 years ago, right?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
they do a little bit better than everyone thought, lighten the beam and everything, and then they kind of were a little bit over their skis when they probably could have just stayed the course and gotten, a little better. I don't know. It's
Then
not
they
like they did
fire
anything.
Brown. You fire Brown maybe to appease a player, and now you're going to get rid of the player. And frankly, you might look back and go, wouldn't hate having Brown as the head coach to guide this ship forward, right? Like it's just
They traded Halliburton to keep Fox, and like it just goes down the line. But anyway, and the owner's a mess and everything.
Yep.
I agree with that. It's a hard place to be. Sometimes the players just force your hand to, like, they just don't want to be there. The Nets fans saw this. The players, like, whatever happens, either in front of the scenes or behind the scenes, like, they just don't want to be there anymore. And then what choice do you have? The Nets, sort of like a mini unprecedented move when KD first asked out that first summer, and they're like, maybe, and then they don't trade him.
Right.
And then, and then they play out the season, and the season's going kind of great at that point. Like, they had won a lot of games, and then everyone kind of wants to leave. Like, it wasn't going great, but like they had won games. Yeah. And you just don't know. And so, like, and the players, I think, are correct from just like a labor standpoint to extract maximum value on like whatever the situation is and to dictate as much of that as possible. I never begrudge a player for doing that. Any person that has a head on their shoulders would do it for themselves, given a similar situation around an employee-employee relationship. So good. If you don't want to be there, don't play there. Like, go get paid somewhere else. The market will tell you if it's fair. Like right. the market will figure out for you if it's fair or not. So I don't love that it's the case, because it means that it's sometimes hard to just sort of like lock in around who you're going to be rooting for. But yeah, you're totally right. Like, this situation could get worse for Sacramento. I mean, they're still going to be okay around some of these guys. Like, they still have NBA talent. Like, they can still make the playoffs, frankly, without Fox, honestly. But it just puts everyone in a weird situation. I do think from like the Nets point of view, it makes I think sometimes when you see consolidation of power too around other teams, it should be another signal. Like, let's say Fox goes to the Spurs, and you're like, well, that could be a pairing that could be actually a real problem here for the next 5 years. And OKC is going to be good for the next few years, right? And you're like, it looks like the Celtics probably aren't going to tail off in a huge way anytime soon. It should be even more of a signal to be like, let's stay the course and do the draft thing, because we might be like 4 or 5 years out to really competing, especially if there's a consolidation around some of these other guys. And does that make sense? Like, I would be even more inclined to just say, let's see if we can get Flag or whoever else and just see where we are in 5 years. And it sucks because life is short, but I mean, how are you going to compete with some of these other teams in the short term? It's going to take a lot of work.
And the reason why I agree with you, and I think it's the right mentality, is even with Fox. Okay, he got the rookie scale extension, and now he's preparing to leave, right? But he's in his 8th season with the Kings, so when you draft a player 5th overall, you do get a long runway about what that timeline looks like, right? And you do get, I think, you get much more buy-in because you drafted that player, and because the Nets are in a position where they could draft 3 or 4 guys this year, then multiple guys the next season. You'll probably, we think, put yourself in a position where even if you don't go pursue a star, you're going to have a young, very talented core. We always think about the OKC kind of model here, right? Tons of young players coming in, have to make some tough choices about who you keep or who you let go of. Not everybody's going to hit. But that gives you a rookie contract and then you, in theory, the extension contract as well to try to figure out how to make sure you have winning basketball. When you talk about superstars, you talk about guys moving around. I don't begrudge anybody for wanting to get where they want to go. But Kevin Durant is a great example of this, right? He bounces around a lot, and you pay a lot to get him. And if it works out, it's awesome. And if it doesn't work out, you spend the next half a season and season trying to figure out how to turn some other assets back into draft picks so you can rebuild yourself the right way. Going superstar hunting is far more risky, even though the upside is there, is far more risky in today's NBA than building through the draft and having some control over some of your young talent. And by the way, the superstars are the way you win championships. Let's be clear, right? Like, we all understand that. But I do think the drafting the young talent and staying the course offers you a better chance for long-term success. And it still leaves you the flexibility to turn around, have Luka become available and say, oh, this is the guy. This is who we go in for, not Fox.
Yeah, I mean, the floor is for sure lower, like, because it takes
Is.
a long time and you can just be one of these teams that sucks for like multiple years. And I get like, that's why fans always push back on this theory, is because it's like, well, look at this team. I get it. And I can just point, I get it. There's teams
And
that have
look at
been
the
wallowing
76ers
this.
right now, and look at what the Heat are going through right now, and look at, like, you can point to a lot of examples of very high caliber talent, and they are about to potentially crumble their organizations, but depending on how they handle it, right?
Oh, I was going to say the other thing too. I was going to say I can show you all the teams that have been drafted high for years and years and years are nowhere close to a championship. Like
100%, right, 100%.
Pistons have some higher draft picks in here. Like Charlotte's got some higher draft picks in here, and they're closer to a championship than, Charlotte's. We're about to see one of the, all-time tank offs, all-time midseason tank offs tomorrow. Well, we're recording this Tuesday night, but on Wednesday, when the Nets roll in without Cam Johnson, without Cam Thomas, without Noah Clowney, without that might be it of those guys, and then the Hornets coming to town with no Brandon Miller, no LaMelo Ball, no Mark Williams, who's been freaking awesome, no Cody Martin, no Josh Green. This is really something. Everyone got the signal here. It's like, under no circumstances is anyone to win this game, and this is like kind of what you get stuck into. So it's all to say. So I just bit my tongue right there. I got so excited. It's all to say. There's no right way to do it. No. And I would say there's no wrong way to do it either. It's all kind of depends on where you are and whether or not you can sort of see through the process and kind of keep a steady hand and get lucky. It's like kind of like you need a lot of things to happen.
And I will say, because we've talked about this before, Oregon, we talk about the Pistons. It's not to throw shade at them, but they have struggled even with top draft picks. The Kings historically have been a team that can never quite figure it out to fit the pieces together to make it work. Even the Hawks, to some extent, having had Trae Young all this time, then they go out and they get Murray, but then they end up moving him. Some, organizations historically seem to fall into similar patterns. Even the 76ers, to a certain extent, over this run, right? They trust the process. Then they had Jimmy Butler, and they chose to move on from him, only to turn around. And now they bring in George and all the issues they have. In the end, if you're a Brooklyn Nets fan and something like this comes up, and for the most part, by the way, I threw this out over on X and everybody jumped in with almost resounding no's. We got a couple of like, well, tell me what the price is. And they just, talk to me about price point. But you should have some, as volatile at times as it has been, the Brooklyn Nets historically have always been capable of getting in the mix. Like, it's worked out. To the extent of being able to land superstars like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, making a trade for James Harden, even in the bad version of trading and landing Paul Pierce and getting Kevin Garnett, that was bad, but the Nets have always been capable of jumping in and going and getting that talent. Other teams haven't been able to do that. Other organizations haven't been able to attract stars like that. So it should give you some level of confidence that the Nets are capable of building up, taking a shot, having it work or not work, and then building up again. They've actually been able to cycle through this process far more than other franchises who have been in similar waters have been capable of doing. Now, it hasn't worked out to the ultimate goal of winning a championship, but the fact that and we just talked about Vince Carter the other day, talk about Jason Kidd, right? Like, they've been able to do this. So it should at least give you optimism that they can navigate through it. Now it's about that next piece of pulling the trigger on the decision and having it lead to deep playoff runs and championship success. But the Nets, to me, are somewhere in a muddling ground above the Detroits of the world and above the Kings of the world, because they've been able to make some pretty significant moves, even if the results haven't always been what you wanted.
And look, the simple fact is we strayed pretty far from Darren Fox here, but the simple fact is, it
became very philosophical.
In the end, you just need one of these top 5 players, or else you're really not going to sniff it. That's
and
it.
The Aaron Fox is not that.
Yeah, because go back. Basically, you needed Tatum, Luka, Jimmy, who played at those levels for multiple playoff stretches, Jokic, Steph for a bunch of years, Tatum again, and LeBron. And that's the list. That's basically the list of the players who have made the finals.
That won chips.
And I'm even putting teams that guys that didn't, that were just in the finals, right? Like Luka and Jimmy and guys like this. And and Kawhi spikes it one year because everyone on Golden State gets hurt.
Yeah.
And
but that's what it takes.
But that's it. That's the list. Those are the guys. And you have to have other good players around them, and you have to get lucky, and you have to stay, healthy, and you have to have a decent coach. And there's other things that go in here. But in the end, this isn't the NCAA, this isn't the March Madness. where you can just run hot, through and get yourself to the Final Four on the back of good vibes for a couple day stretch. 7-game series, you better just have the best player, and you better have like the best player and the third best player in the series or something like that. And like, that's how you're going to win. And your goal should always just be to go get those guys any way possible. And so
we are, 100%. We're in agreement. We're both not interested in a De'Aaron Fox trade, not even as a precursor to something larger. And there's other things beyond even this Hornets matchup on Wednesday night. We also got to talk about Windhorse mentioning Ben Simmons as a buyout candidate, something that Doug was disgusted by hearing. We don't understand it, but we will come to you. And we will explain to you why that's an insane thing to say live on television. So we'll get into all that throughout the course of this week. But first and foremost, up next, come on, guys. We can do it. We can lose to the Hornets. We'll come back after that one on Thursday.
When Ben Simmons gets bought out, I am going to look like an absolute stone cold dolt. But
can I be honest with you, too? I do have some low-level concerns before we go. Because you and I have known each other a long time. I respect you, and I think that you're a detail-oriented guy. I don't think you just throw out flippant takes. But there are times when I have concerns about hitching my wagon to you, and this is one of those where I'm like,
now this should not be one of them. This should not be one of them. But
I'm pushing.
Stranger things.
You know,
I'll asterisk this to the day I die because something else will come up that I'll be like, I said that if it would happen, but I'll stand very firm. I just never think this is happening. And again, I'll take the massive, massive L if it ever does. That's all right. I own my mistakes. You don't need any mistakes. You'd be making a mistake. Look at this. Look at this tie-in. If you do not subscribe to Locked.Net's over on YouTube, do not subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. That is the mistake you will make. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen. Free for you. Number one way to help the podcast.
Mid pat on the back and an outro. I love it. Talk about, going for superstars, making trades, drafts. It's all a dart throw. And mark my words, Michael Van Gerwen will knock Phil Taylor off his perch one day and be the best darts player on the planet. And that's from the guy we all know, king of the darts, Eric Bristow. Yeah.
Wow. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, darts, basketball.